On March 24, 2015, Germanwings Flight 9525, an Airbus A320, was en route from Barcelona, Spain to Düsseldorf, Germany, when it inexplicably crashed into the French Alps, killing all 150 people on board. The investigation that followed revealed a shocking truth. The co-pilot, Andreas Lubitz, had deliberately caused the crash while the captain was locked out of the cockpit. This is the story of mental illness, missed warning signs, and how one man's actions led to an unspeakable tragedy. On the morning of March 24, 2015, 144 passengers and 6 crew members boarded Germanwings Flight 9525 in Barcelona. The flight was bound for Düsseldorf, Germany. The aircraft, an Airbus A320, was in good condition, and there were no signs of any mechanical issues during pre-flight checks. In the cockpit were 2 experienced pilots. The captain, 34-year-old Patrick Sundenheimer, had nearly 7,000 flight hours, over half of them logged on the Airbus A320. He was well regarded for his professionalism and had recently moved to Germanwings from its parent company, Lufthansa. The first officer, Andreas Lubitz, was 27 years old and had accumulated around 900 hours of flight experience, with 540 hours on the A320. Flight 9525 took off from Barcelona's El Prat airport at 10:01 a.m. local time. The initial part of the flight was uneventful. The plane climbed to its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet, flying smoothly through clear skies. Little did anyone know, this ordinary flight was about to turn into a nightmare. What no one on board knew at the time was that Lubitz had a troubling history. Since childhood, he had dreamed of becoming a pilot, and in 2008 he joined Lufthansa's flight training program. However, during his training, Lubitz began experiencing psychological issues, including severe depression and anxiety. At one point, he had to halt his training due to his mental health, and he was placed under psychiatric care. Lubitz was diagnosed with depression and prescribed antidepressants, but he eventually returned to flying after a lengthy treatment period. Despite being cleared to fly, Lubitz's struggles continued. His mental health fluctuated, and he sought treatment from several doctors, some of whom prescribed medication for anxiety, depression, and insomnia. In the months leading up to the crash, Lubitz had been issued sick leave certificates by his doctors, but he concealed this information from his employer. As the co-pilot on Germanwings Flight 9525, Lubitz was entrusted with the safety of the passengers and crew, but on this fateful day, his battle with mental illness took a devastating turn. At approximately 10:27 a.m., just 26 minutes into the flight, Captain Sundenheimer asked Lubitz to take over the controls while he left the cockpit for a short break. Lubitz, now alone in the cockpit, took this opportunity to put a deadly plan into motion. Lubitz locked the cockpit door, preventing anyone from re-entering. This action wasn't unusual, as modern cockpit security measures, introduced after the September 11th attacks, allowed pilots to lock the door to prevent unauthorized access. However, Lubitz did more than lock the door. He also set the plane's autopilot to descend to an altitude of just 100 feet. As the aircraft began its deadly descent, passengers and crew members had no idea of the danger they were in. Outside the cockpit, the captain tried to return, but he found the door locked. He knocked, expecting Lubitz to open it. When Lubitz failed to respond, the captain's knocks became more frantic. At 10:31 a.m., Marseille air traffic controllers noticed that Germanwings Flight 9525 had begun an unscheduled descent. The plane was dropping rapidly, but there had been no distress call from the cockpit, no indication that anything was wrong. In the cockpit, Lubitz remained silent. He breathed steadily, showing no signs of distress. Meanwhile, the autopilot guided the plane downward, and the descent rate fluctuated between 1,700 and 5,000 feet per minute. At this point, the passengers likely began to realize something was wrong. Some reports suggest they might have heard the captain pounding on the cockpit door, trying desperately to get back inside. Back in the cabin, panic set in. The crew and passengers were left in confusion, unsure why the plane was dropping so quickly. The captain used the emergency intercom to plead with Lubitz, asking him to unlock the door. When that failed, he tried to break down the door using a crowbar kept in the cabin for emergencies, but the reinforced cockpit door, designed to withstand forcible entry, kept him out. As the descent continued, air traffic controllers in Marseille tried repeatedly to contact the aircraft, asking the pilots to confirm their altitude.
Please confirm altitude. Please confirm altitude.
They asked multiple times, but there was no response from Lubitz. Realizing the severity of the situation, Marseille controllers alerted French military authorities, who scrambled a fighter jet to intercept the descending plane, but the military's response came too late. The A320 was already too low, and there was nothing the fighter jet could do to prevent the impending crash. 10:40 a.m., the plane had descended to just over 6,000 feet, approaching the rugged terrain of the French Alps. The ground proximity warning system cues in the cockpit began sounding a loud alarm. Terrain. Pull up, but Lubitz did nothing.
Terrain. Pull up. Terrain. Pull up.
He sat in silence, ignoring the warnings as the plane hurtled toward the mountains. In the final moments, the passengers would have heard the warnings blaring in the cabin and felt the plane's rapid descent. In those last seconds, there was nothing anyone could do. At 10:41 a.m., Germanwings Flight 9525 crashed into a mountainside near Prats-Haute-Blion in the French Alps. The impact was catastrophic, and all 150 people on board were killed instantly. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, rescue teams were dispatched to the remote crash site. The location, deep in the mountains, was difficult to access, and it took hours for the first responders to reach the wreckage. When they arrived, they found the site completely devastated, with no survivors. The French Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety (BEA) led the investigation into the crash. They recovered the flight data recorder FDR and cockpit voice recorder CVR, which provided crucial evidence about what had happened during the flight. The CVR revealed the chilling truth. Lubitz had deliberately locked the captain out of the cockpit and programmed the aircraft to descend. His actions were intentional, and his silence during the descent showed that he was fully aware of what he was doing. Investigators also uncovered Lubitz's medical history, revealing his struggles with depression and suicidal thoughts. Lubitz had concealed his mental health issues from his employer, and Germanwings had no knowledge of his condition. The Germanwings Flight 9525 tragedy sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. The idea that a co-pilot could deliberately crash a plane was unimaginable. In response to the crash, aviation authorities around the world introduced new safety measures. One of the most significant changes was the introduction of the two-person rule, which required that at least 2 crew members be present in the cockpit at all times. This rule was designed to prevent any one person from being left alone in control of the aircraft, thereby reducing the risk of a similar incident happening in the future. Additionally, airlines and aviation regulators began to focus more on the mental health of pilots. The tragedy highlighted the need for more thorough psychological evaluations during pilot training and regular mental health screenings throughout a pilot's career. There were also calls for improved communication between doctors and airlines, ensuring that airlines are made aware if a pilot is unfit to fly due to mental health issues. The crash of Germanwings Flight 9525 was a tragedy not only for the aviation industry but for the families of the 150 people who lost their lives. Among the victims were 16 school children and their teachers. Part of an exchange program between Germany and Spain, their loss left a deep scar in their communities. In the days following the crash, memorial services were held across Europe. Families, friends, and loved ones gathered to remember those who had been lost. Balloons were released into the sky, one for each victim, as a symbol of remembrance. For Captain Patrick Sondenheimer's family, the tragedy was especially heartbreaking. Sondenheimer had spent the final moments of his life trying to save the aircraft and its passengers, courageously attempting to break into the cockpit and regain control of the plane. His wife later founded a charity in his memory, dedicated to helping children who have experienced grief and loss. The crash of Germanwings Flight 9525 was a devastating reminder of the importance of both aviation safety and mental health awareness. While new regulations and safety measures have since been put in place to prevent a similar disaster, the tragedy has left an indelible mark on the industry. The victims of Flight 9525 will never be forgotten, and their loss continues to remind us of the need for constant vigilance, compassion, and communication in both the aviation world and in addressing mental health challenges.